everyone. I'm Allison Kane,
And I'm Maribel James.
and we would like to give our presentation on the types of performance management systems. What is performance management? Performance management is a continuous process of planning, monitoring, and reviewing each employee's performance. We want to ensure that each employee's performance is in line with the company's overall goals. We should promote and improve the employee's effectiveness through this appraisal process. Coaching and development, that's the name of the game. There are several types of performance management systems. First, we have a practice-focused, which really is based on the policies and procedures of a company or our nursing professional practice standards. We also have a practitioner-focused, and this is where you have a direct observation of that employee. You would base the evaluation on critical incidents or findings that you're having. And they also do a self-reflection. And then you can have peer review. So we'll go over those in a little bit. Maribel will discuss those. And then there are patient focus, which is outcome measures. And then you can also base the appraisal on performance or recognition from other employees and also patients, as in nursing. So then I want to talk about the performance management cycle. There's a cycle where you go through planning, monitoring, and then reviewing and evaluation. The performance management cycle is ongoing. It isn't just a set period of time. You would want to continuously grow and develop and coach your staff. So during that planning phase, you and the employee want to identify and clarify. Everybody needs to be on the same page of the expectations. You want to see how those results will be measured, and then you want to agree on the monitoring process. And then documentation is always a key point in the plan. And then you move to the monitoring section. And this is ongoing, right? You want to monitor and evaluate with that employee throughout the year. Here at our organization, we have 90-day evaluation, and then we'll do a mid-year, mid-cycle evaluation, and then our annual evaluations. And during that time, it's a constant growth process. So you want to make those corrective actions and adjustments along the way so that at the end of the year, you have a clear and objective evaluation for that person. And the end of the year, you have the review and evaluation, and that's where you will sign off and validate that employee, how they met the objectives and what new goals they might have for the next year. Key components from an employee's perspective. When we discuss this, we're really looking at why are we going to have an employee appraisal? Well, you want to look at, we do pay increases based on those evaluations. We have promotions based on that. And then also it helps with retention. Let's talk about a few basics. When you are setting up your appraisal, you want to clearly identify your work standards, what you're going to base the appraisal on. And then you're going to assess each employee's actual performance based on those standards, so there's no misunderstanding. And then along the way, like we discussed, you develop those plans for addressing any opportunities. I like that word instead of deficiency. And then you want to provide that feedback. You really want to reinforce how great someone is doing based on their strengths. Then next we would have characteristics of a good rating system. So what we evaluate our appraisal on should be based on a good performance review of their duties and then the standards from a job description or a job analysis. We also base those performance review on observable behaviors and objective data, not subjective. Characteristics of a good rating system. We want to set clear expectations ahead of time. Nothing should be a surprise. And then along that way, we've talked about making sure that employee is on track with their performance. And we've had direct supervision of that employee so that we can have objective data. And then we want to include them in that appraisal process. Maribel will talk about the different appraisal systems that you can use in just a moment. We want to allow that employee, we want to bring them in so that they have buy-in to the process, so that they know that we are listening to their input, we hear their voice regarding that assessment. We want to indicate and talk with the employee about the opportunities where they might need to improve. where if we use supervisors or other charge nurses, other directors, whoever will be doing the appraisal, there's training that can be involved in this so that it goes smoothly. A good rating system also has, once the appraiser knows how the system works, if any problems come up, we want to make sure that they are able to deal with those problems effectively. And we are discussing that evaluation of an appraisal with the employee specifically to let them know ahead of time what's going to be expected, the objectives we're hoping to accomplish, and how we want to see their growth throughout the year. And we will discuss all of that with them so that they have a clear understanding. We're going to transition, and Maribel's going to discuss some potential problems that we could have.
Okay, I want to talk to y'all about the different aspects of the appraisal process. The literature says that an appraisal is essentially the act of examining someone or something in order to judge their qualities, success, or needs. Dessler describes performance appraisal as the evaluation of an employee's performance in relation to the set of standards of their job description. I do want to reiterate that what Allison talked about earlier about the three-step process required for performance appraisal, and that's essentially where you set your work principles, you assess the employee's actual performance compared to those principles, and give feedback to the employee with the purpose of helping him or her eliminate any performance inefficiencies. So I also want to include that McDonald's had the opinion that appraisals should focus more on the good and positive aspects of a person's career rather than the negatives, because it encourages the person to focus more on positive future goals. However, we need to make sure that we also still highlight those areas where improvements can be made. So I wanted to talk to you about first the potential rating problems that could occur, because we're going to talk about them later as advantages or disadvantages towards different rating systems. So I wanted to kind of go through them with you so that you're aware of what we're speaking about. So one of those potential rating problems is unclear standards. And this is where the appraisal is just too open for interpretation. And the best way to overcome this is to be very descriptive about the different categories that you're rating. Then there's also the halo effect, and this is where the problem that occurs when a supervisor's rating of a subordinate is one that is based on a specific trait rather than rating the person on all the different aspects. Then you also have the central tendency, which is a tendency to rate all employees the same way, such as rating them all as average. There's also a leniency or strictness one, where the problem that occurs when a supervisor has a tendency to either rate all its subordinates either as high or low. And this sometimes happens with instructors. They usually use this a lot with rating students high or low. Then we have the recency effect. This is where essentially you're letting what the employee has done recently blind you to what his or her performance has been over the year. So now I want to talk about who normally does these performance appraisals. And normally it's usually done by the immediate supervisor, who's usually the best choice because they're the ones who are out and about and see the employees, how they're acting, how they're behaving, how they're doing their work, and we're ultimately responsible for ensuring that our quality of care is up to par. And as a nurse manager, I take that responsibility very serious because it's my responsibility to make sure that all my employees are doing what they need to do to make sure that my patients are getting the care that we say that we're going to give. So the literature also states that evaluation is important, necessary, and it needs to be continuous. When it comes to the human resource aspect, they are there to be as an advisory role to us. Here in my facility, our human resource department works really closely with us. They provide us with the appraisal itself, and then as the supervisor, we rate all our employees according to how we think they've done throughout the year, and then we average out the score and submit it to human resources, and then whatever we base their potential merit raises or whatever performance or even promotions on it. So there are other types of appraisals that can be done. There's the peer appraisal. These appraisals are completed by the employee's peers. There's also rating committees. Committees usually includes the employee supervisor and a few other supervisors who are kind of all aware of the same, what the requirements for the job is. There's also a self-rating, and this is where the employee kind of gives themselves, scores themselves. And a problem with this is that sometimes a lot of employees will score themselves higher than, say, their supervisor will. But at times they use these self-rating scores in conjunction with the supervisor's scores to kind of average out the scores. There's appraisals by subordinates, where employees choose to allow subordinates to rate their managers as a way to help managers grow in their position. There's also something called a 360-degree feedback. In this appraisal, the employer seeks feedback on an employee's performance by collecting information from others who work with the employee. Now I want to talk about different techniques for appraising performance. One of them is the graphic rating scale method. This is the simplest and most popular method for appraising performance. It utilizes a scale that lists the desired traits and a range of performance for each. The advantage of this technique is that it is simple to use and it provides quantitative rating for each employee. A disadvantage is that the standards may be unclear, could have a halo effect, central tendency, leniency, and bias can also be a problem. The next one is the behaviorally anchored rating scales known as BARS, and this is an appraisal method that aims at combining the benefits of narrative critical incidents and quantified ratings by anchoring a quantified scale with specific narrative examples of good or poor performance. These critical incidents can be very good incidents or they could be very poor incidents, so they're not just all bad. And an advantage of this one is that it provides behavioral anchors, and BARS is a very accurate system, but a disadvantage is it is very difficult to develop. Another technique is alternation ranking method, and this is ranking employees from best to worst on trait or traits. The advantage is it is simple to use and avoids central tendency and other problems of rating scales. The disadvantage is that it can cause disagreements among employees and may be unfair if all employees are in fact excellent employees. Then you have the forced distribution method, and this method is similar to grading on a curve. An advantage of this is it prevents supervisors from rating all or most employees satisfactory or high, and another advantage is you end up with a predetermined number or percentage of people in each group. A disadvantage is it includes employees' appraisals depend on your choice of cutoff points. So the critical incident method, in this method, the supervisor keeps a log of positive and negative examples called critical incidents of a subordinate's work-related behaviors. This is something that I do because as the year goes on, you're not going to remember something in January that happened in June or July, but it just helps keep a record of something extraordinary an employee did or something, you know, kind of the disciplinary action you did for an employee, kind of to be able to add it in their annual evaluation. So the downs, you know, it kind of makes us think about what the subordinate has done all year long. The downside is that it does not produce relative ratings for pay raise purposes. but an advantage is it helps specify what is right and wrong about the employee's performance, forces supervisors to evaluate subordinates on an ongoing basis. Another one we have is the management of objectives. The term management by objectives, also known as MBO, usually refers to a multi-step company-wide goal setting and appraisal system. And a big disadvantage of this is it requires numerous time-consuming meetings, and we're seeing that these aren't really being used a lot. But an advantage is it is tied to jointly agreed upon performance objectives. Then we have the paired comparison method, and this method just makes the rating method more precise. The narrative form, all or part of the written appraisal may be in narrative form. There's a mixed standard scales, which is somewhat similar to the behavior anchored scales. So we go on with, there's also computerized and web-based performance appraisals. These are where employers increasingly use computerized or internet-based appraisal systems. You have the electronic performance monitoring. This system uses computer network technology to allow managers to monitor their employees' computers. I'm not a big fan of this one. There's also a conversation days. Instead of a once-a-year performance review, there are now semi-annual conversation days. So the literature says that these appraisal systems should not be sessions to criticize a person's performance. It should be a positive quality time, enabling the person to feel supported in their developmental needs, ultimately enabling them to do the best they can be in delivering a service to the patients. The literature also states that these performance appraisals are such an important process in an organization to ensure that the organization achieves its goals. And I know it's very important to our facility that we do these performance appraisals so that we can coach up our employees to be the best that they can be and recognize those that are doing extremely well. So with that, is there any questions, please do not hesitate to send us a discussion question, and we will be more than happy to answer any question you may have.